Story 1. The Attic Door. This happened in the winter of 2017, when I was house-sitting for my parents in their old, rambling Victorian house in the suburbs. They were out of town for a week, and it was just me and the two very old, very quiet cats. The house was always a bit unnerving at night, the kind of place where every floorboard creaked with purpose and the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the eaves. I'm usually pretty good at shrugging off the spooky stuff, but this particular week felt different. The sheer age of the house, combined with the isolation of being alone, started to wear on my nerves from the first night. The cats, usually a source of comfort, seemed more skittish than usual, their eyes wide and fixed on unseen points in the shadows. I was in the living room, trying to lose myself in a book, the only light source a warm, low-wattage lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from outside or from any of the usual house noises like the refrigerator or the heating system. It sounded like it was coming from directly above me. The attic. My parents had always kept the attic door locked, a relic from some long-forgotten paranoia, and it was up there, tucked away in the darkest corner of the upstairs hallway, a place I'd never really ventured into. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like fingernails on wood. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the house settling or a branch hitting the roof, but it was too regular, too deliberate. It had a cadence that felt almost intentional. I finally put my book down, the words blurring on the page. My heart started to pound a little faster, a dull thud against my ribs. I told myself I was being silly, letting the old house get to me. It was just an old house, full of old sounds, but the tapping didn't stop. It felt like it was mocking me, a subtle taunt from the darkness above, daring me to come investigate. With a growing sense of dread, I slowly made my way up the stairs, each creak of the wood amplifying in the oppressive silence. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit by a single weak bulb, its light barely pushing back the shadows. The attic door loomed at the end, a dark, ominous rectangle against the far wall. The tapping seemed louder now, more urgent, a frantic rhythm that made my skin crawl. I stood there for a long moment, straining my ears, trying to decipher the sound, trying to rationalize it away. Then it stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was almost worse than the noise, leaving an echo in my ears and a tightening in my chest. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I told myself I needed to know. I reached for the doorknob. It was icy cold beneath my trembling fingers, just like always. I turned it, and to my utter shock, it clicked open. The door swung inward a few inches on its own, revealing only an impenetrable blackness. I peered into the void, my eyes straining, but I couldn't see anything. No light, no movement, just a deep, suffocating darkness that seemed to absorb all sound and hope. And then, from the absolute blackness within, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It was soft, dry, and chillingly close. It sounded like my name. I didn't wait to hear it again. I slammed the door shut with a force that echoed through the house, fumbled frantically with the lock until it clicked, and then I ran downstairs. I spent the rest of the night huddled under a mountain of blankets, wide awake, listening to every tiny sound, convinced something had been waiting just on the other side of that door, something that knew my name. Until today, I have no rational explanation for how that door opened on its own, or what was whispering from the darkness. Story 2. The Empty Field. This happened about 3 years ago, in the early fall. I was driving back to my apartment after visiting my grandmother in a rural part of Pennsylvania. It was late, well past midnight, and I was on these long, winding country roads where the only lights were the occasional farmhouse and the faint glow of the moon. I was tired, and the monotonous drive was starting to lull me into a kind of daze. The road I was on had always been a little creepy. It was bordered on one side by dense woods and on the other by a vast, empty field that seemed to stretch on forever, a dark expanse under the starless sky. The silence outside the car was profound, broken only by the hum of my tires on the asphalt. As I rounded a bend, my headlights swept across the field, and I saw something that made me hit the brakes. Standing in the middle of that empty field, about 50 yards from the road, was a figure. It was tall and slender, and it was just standing there, facing the woods. It was too far away to make out any features, but its posture was unsettlingly still, almost unnatural. It seemed to absorb the faint moonlight without reflecting it. I told myself it was probably just a scarecrow, or maybe some weird art installation someone had put up, but there was something about its stillness, its sheer isolation in that desolate landscape, that sent a cold dread coiling in my stomach. It looked out of place, fundamentally wrong. I kept staring, my mind racing, trying to dismiss what I was seeing. The figure didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift in weight. It was like a statue carved from shadow, utterly devoid of life, yet undeniably present. The silence outside the car was absolute, no crickets, no wind, nothing. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting. I started to feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a primal instinct screaming that I was being watched, intensely. I slowly started to drive again, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, keeping my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting the figure to move, to do something impossible. But it remained utterly motionless, a dark silhouette against the pale, empty field, an enigma under the oppressive night sky. As I drove further away, the figure eventually disappeared from my sight behind a distant cluster of trees at the edge of the field. But the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. It lingered, a cold, heavy presence in the back of my mind, a phantom sensation that followed me home. I kept glancing at the empty field in my side mirrors, half expecting to see it suddenly much closer, appearing and disappearing with impossible speed. I never saw it again, but sometimes, when I drive through that area at night, even now, I still get that same unnerving feeling, that same prickling on my skin, and I can't shake the image of that silent, solitary figure in the middle of nowhere. I still wonder what it was doing there, and if it was truly alone, or if it was just waiting for me to pass. Story 3. The Basement Window. This happened about 2 years ago. I was living in a small, older apartment in a quiet neighborhood. My bedroom window overlooked the backyard, which was mostly just a patch of overgrown grass and a dilapidated shed. The apartment had a basement that was accessible from the outside, through a bulkhead door and also from a small stairwell inside the kitchen. I rarely went down there. It was damp, dark, and full of cobwebs, the kind of place that felt like it held on to stale air and forgotten things. One night, I was home alone, as usual, and I was getting ready for bed, the routine a comfort against the encroaching darkness. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, the fluorescent light buzzing slightly, casting a stark, uninviting glow. The bathroom had a small, frosted window that looked out onto the backyard, positioned just above the ground-level basement window. As I glanced out, my reflection momentarily caught my eye, but then something else did. Directly outside the basement window, pressed against the glass, was a face. It was a man's face, pale and distorted, his eyes wide and staring, fixed directly on me through the frosted pane. It was horrifyingly close, and even in the dim light, I could see the intensity of his gaze. I dropped my toothbrush, and it clattered loudly in the sink, the sound jarring in the otherwise quiet apartment. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I blinked, telling myself my eyes were playing tricks on me, that the shadows were deceiving me. But the face was still there, unwavering. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stared, its expression unreadable, but undeniably unsettling. I backed away from the window slowly, my gaze locked on the terrifying visage, a cold dread washing over me. I crept out of the bathroom, intending to run for the front door to get out of the apartment, but then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scraping sound from the direction of the basement window. It sounded like something, or someone, was trying to pry it open. I could feel a bone-chilling cold spreading through me, the primal fear of an intruder, of something unknown. I didn't go near the basement again that night. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, piling a heavy dresser against the door and staying awake with every light on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I listened intently for any further sounds from the basement, for any sign that the face or the scraping had returned, but there was nothing. By morning, the scraping had stopped and the sun's rays, weak as they were through the dusty windows, brought a fragile sense of relief. When I finally worked up the courage to go to the basement window, I found nothing. No footprints, no marks on the glass, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. But the image of that face, pressed against the glass, staring with those vacant eyes, is something I'll never forget. I still don't know who it was, or why they were looking into my basement window that night, and the memory of it still makes my blood run cold.